Good morning. Welcome to Mansfield First Assembly of God. It's Father's Day. Glad that you could watch and be a part of this. And I want to say Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. What a wonderful privilege it is that God has given to us. We've been granted this opportunity to be fathers. And so avail yourself of that opportunity. Take advantage of it. Be the best dad that you can be. And your family, your community, not just your children, but all of our world will be better because of it. And so again, I want to say thank the Lord. What a great privilege it is to know and experience that gift of fatherhood. We're going to begin our service this morning with Sister Teresa singing a song for us. We're going to go ahead and have her sing it this time, Sister Teresa. Amen. Aren't you glad to be the Lord's this morning, to be a part of His family? What a privilege it is to be a part of this family. We know what a privilege it is in this world, in this life, to have family. One of the things that I see sometimes sad is when somebody's family is all gone, all the brothers and sisters, and they may be gone, or maybe they didn't even have those, and all that's left is just them. It just becomes kind of a lonely and sad life for a lot of people. But one of the great benefits to human nature is that we become acquainted with other people, and sometimes we take them in as family. We see that in children all the time. Children be adopted, but sometimes people make adopted parents or grandparents or friends and become very close to them. And so it's a great privilege that we know to be able to have that bonding with one another. The Lord wants that bond with us even greater, to be a part of His family and to know what it is, to be grafted into the kingdom of God, to be a part of what He's doing. If you have your Bibles this morning, Want to read along with us? Genesis chapter 4 is where we begin this morning. Again, it's Father's Day. Wish everybody a happy Father's Day. Beautiful experience of being a father when it's done according to God's plan. There is a plan that God has for fathers. He has revealed himself to us as the Heavenly Father. Not any better example that we'll ever find than the love and the kindness and the direction and the leadership that God has shown to us. And so a lot of similarities that we see between humanity and with God. Genesis chapter 4, verse number 1 says, "And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground." And in that verse number 1 of chapter 4, where we begin reading this morning, it says, "And Adam knew Eve his wife." Now this is just an old English way or biblical times translation way of saying that Adam and Eve had sex and a child resulted from that. And, to a lot of the world today, to many people in the world, this is where that story should end. This is the end of Adam's involvement with the children. Now it's all up to Eve. She's supposed to take care of them and see to them, and, it's her responsibility, and that mindset has permeated our culture today. We live in a world where this should be, in many cases, the end of the story. He has impregnated his wife, and his job is over, is the way that many people see it. But I want to tell you this morning, and very bluntly and plainly, that just to get somebody pregnant and head on down the highway may seem like the thing to do, but it's not the right thing to do. It's not God's plan, and it is one of the major reasons, if not the most significant reason, that we have so much challenges in our society today. There's a huge difference between fathering a child and being a father. They're two different things. A boy, oftentimes, a teenage boy can father a child, but it takes a man to be a father. Our world today has plenty of boys who can go and, have a child, and be a father of a child. But to really be a father, there's a shortage of men willing to take up that role and to take on that responsibility. And I'm not talking about just the merely age. I'm talking about people who are willing to be the men that God called us to be. In passages in Scripture we read where in biblical language it said, "Quit you like men," which meant, stop acting, the sissy role or the scared role or the baby role, and stand up and be men. We need a world of men who will stand up and be godly men in our time. And I know it's going against the grain of our culture. I understand today that there is such an opposition to fulfilling the godly roles that God has set forth for men and women, that it is a struggle. And there will be a lot of snickering and chiding and those things if you live out your life according to the plan that God has laid out. And I want to tell you what that plan is. That plan is one man, one woman, married, having a family, and raising them up according to God's plan, raising them in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. And I know that oftentimes you deal, people around you, they haven't started out in the best situations and scenarios. But that moment that we come to God and to begin to seek God is that time that we should, as best we can, assemble ourselves and put ourselves together into that person, into that package, to take on the role that God has called us to be. I understand that the past can't be changed, that there's no going back to yesterday and redoing or undoing anything from the past. But if you haven't made some of those mistakes that others have, that you've seen gone before you, then I would encourage you this morning, the best way to live your life and the way with the least problems, the least headache. Again, it's not popular today. The popular thing in our world is for a man and woman to have some excitement, some attraction to each other. They just begin to live together. Friend, that's sin. I don't care what kind of picture you paint on it, what label you put on it, or how much you may think you're in love with that guy you met 2 weeks on the internet. It's not God's plan, and it's doomed from the start. Now, can good things come from that? Absolutely. Children that are born, and there's a term, it kind of bothers me. People speak about child born in sin.
The child is not the problem of that. It's simply evidence that there was sin. The sin occurred 9 months before the birth of that child. And so sometimes a child born in a situation like that, they maybe grow up with a feeling of insecurity or a problem from that. The child is not the problem. The problem is that there was a sin that was committed. We live in a time where the idea of being a father is much different than the traditional role that we've known for centuries here in America, and certainly far different than the idea that God envisioned when He created Adam and Eve. There was nothing wrong with the relationship between Adam and Eve. Eve had been made by God and presented to Adam as his wife. And understand as well that she was female. This wasn't Adam and Steve. This is Adam and Eve who are beginning this family together. But even in this family that God has brought together, there are some problems. So there's not going to be any family that escapes having some problems. But we can lessen the problems, and we can lessen the severity of the problems that come by following God's plan. You know, one of the difficult challenges sometimes parents face is coming to the realization that while our children are small, it can pretty well make them do what it is that we desire them to do. But as they get older, and you'll hear this term, well, they've got a mind of their own. Well, absolutely they do. They're designed by God to have a mind of their own that allows them the free will to express themselves and to live their lives according to their plan. And that won't always be according to the way that mom and dad would like them to go. So there's a growing up process not only for the child in the home, but also for the parents in the home as we transition through the stages of life that God has brought us into. We begin to realize that as we grow older, we're less of the disciplinarian and more of the counselor and hopefully the giver of sage and wise wisdom in our world. I will tell you this morning, this isn't a pat to me on the back, although I'm very proud of this fact, but I'm a rarity. I'm a rarity in the world that we live in today. I'm married to my kid's mom, and she's the only wife that I've had. We're not a blended family, and I'm not speaking down to blended families this morning. I'm just telling you this is not the plan. This is not the way that God ordained it. The sooner that we get our lives on track, and friend, I hope I'm not offensive to you this morning. That's not my intention at all. But I simply come to tell you the truth. If we're going to celebrate fathers and Father's Day, let's get fathers and fatherhood right. Let's get it in the right direction, in the right correlation to what it should be according to the plan of God. You know, we live in a time where we're hoping to discover something new to replace everything that we've been taught, everything that we believe throughout the centuries, and really since the dawn of mankind. There's a great urgency in our world to find an alternative to these standards and to the ideas and to the teachings that have been foundational to our culture and to our society, to godly living throughout history. And so one of those things is that fatherhood, that the role of the father in the home can be replaced. And I know that sometimes situations arise where that family is literally better off if father isn't there, if he's abusive, if he's, going to beat somebody to death in the home, or, he's a violent person, or other problems as well. I understand that sometimes that there are times where it's better for that family if the father isn't there. But that's because the father is not fulfilling the role that he ought to be. He's not going home and beating your wife and kids, or showing up drunk after you spent the electric bill and the house payment down at the local casino. Is not God's idea of being a father. That's not His plan. His plan is that father would love and nurture that family, that he would be the protector and not the destroyer of that home. So when the father's got his role taken care of, then it can just transcend on down into the other roles in that home. If there is a missing father, the head of that home, if that father position or that father role is not fulfilled right from the top, there's a huge hole in that family's situation. So it's going to be very difficult to overcome some of the challenges of life. You see, we have been ordained, we've been created, we were made in this fashion. And as much as many people in the world would like to change that, would like to say, well, it doesn't have to be that way, I understand there's exceptions. Again, I please realize, I understand that occasionally There are exceptions, but those exceptions, again, come back to someone is not doing what they should as a father in that home. Our world is suffering today because so many men have recused themselves of being fathers. They were more than willing to father the children, but they didn't want to be a father to the children. And again, I've already told you this, but there's a huge difference between those things. You know, I mentioned to you a moment ago that I'm a rarity because I'm still married to my one and only wife, and I'm the father of all of the kids in the home. And that's becoming rarer and rarer. This used to be the common thing. When you saw a family, this was the common order of things. It was just, you know, assumed that that's the way that it was, and anything different than that was an exception. I wonder sometimes if maybe I need protection as an endangered species because so quickly we are becoming a diminished population. And let me just throw this in here as a little bit of a side. You know, one of the prominent roles of a father in the home is to provide for that family, to provide for his wife and his children. I know oftentimes today families that feel like it's necessary that the mom would help provide in that family and their financial situation, but the role is ordained unto the father. And so when I hear somebody come to me, and I'll just warn you, if you ever want to do it, don't come to me crying about child support. I mean, if you're going to father those children, if you're going to be the daddy of them, just get ready to support them. I've got no sympathy when somebody comes and tells me that he's got 2 or 3 kids, off somewhere, and he's working a lousy job because he's just not going to turn loose of any money because of that woman he married and how awful she is. It's not about the other woman. And I don't care what she's buying with that money. If she's taking care of your kids, if she's raising your kids, go get you a real job, go to work and support your family and be a man. Be a father to those kids, whether you can get along with the ex or not. Be the dad that you ought to be to those kids. Show them. Forget trying to show her. I'll show her. Forget trying to show her. Show those kids what it means that somebody loves them and cares about them in this world. That they're willing to make a sacrifice to see them be supported and to see them have a decent life. Then I'd also warn you, think about that next time before you father any more children about how you and her get along. You know, it's sad that in our time today, people spend more time researching a new car purchase on the internet than they spend getting to know the person that's supposed to be their lifelong partner. That doesn't make sense to me. We read the reviews about, whatever it is that we're thinking about purchasing. We go and we talk to the salesperson. Is this a good one? Is this quality? Do you have a lot of returns? Are a lot of people happy with this? We study what other people have said about it, looking at those reviews. Is it a 2-star review, a 5-star review? What do other people think about this? Sometimes people even will look and consider the resale value. Now, hopefully you don't need to consider that with your spouse, but my point is simply that people will put a lot of thought and a lot of study and a lot of effort into a major purchase. And yet sometimes they are so driven by their feelings concerning who that they get together with that it's just astonishing. And sometimes it's people who are wise in very other ways that exercise so little wisdom in their approach to life, so drawn by their emotional feelings and their physical attraction. Oh, he's so cute. Oh, she's so pretty. She's so fine. All that kind of stuff. Think about down the road. Who is this? And is this someone that you want to 10, 20, and 40 years from now or longer, if the Lord should grant you that you're going to be desiring to have a life with? Fatherhood is not just a joyful experience. It's also a responsibility. There's a responsibility that comes with that pleasure involved. I told you, it's a great thrill for me to look at my 3 kids and see them and experience things with them, to know their life. When your kid comes up, puts their arm around and says, "Hey, Dad, I love you," or "Happy Father's Day," whatever. That's a great joy that we have, seeing them succeed in their lives, seeing them do things and accomplish things, seeing them be silly or funny, enjoying them as they're from babyhood to adulthood. You're still enjoying their life. It's a great blessing to have. But there's also a responsibility that comes along with that blessing. Luke chapter 15 tells us the parable of the prodigal son as Jesus is explaining the relationship between the father and his sons. One son goes astray. He's the most focused on. We even call it the prodigal of the parable son, or the parable of the lost son. And so that's the focus, but there's two sons in this story. One of them departs from his father's house. Most people at least know the story well. The quick summary is he decides he wants to live life according to his own plan. Says, Dad, give me all that's coming to me. The dad says, okay, here you go. And so he goes out, turns his life into one huge disaster, and comes crawling back to Dad, saying, Dad, I want to be back at your house, but I realize I've made such a horrible mess of my life. I'll just be one of your servants and not your son. The father says, nonsense. You're going to be my son again. I'm so happy that you're back. We're going to have a big celebration. The other brother comes and says, why are you having a celebration for him? I never left you. You didn't do this for me. And the father says, or tells him, all this was available to you as well. Everything that was here. What he wanted him to understand was, I have loved you as much. I've had as much desire for you as I have for that one that has struggled so hard. We see this so often in life. Sometimes people seem to be just a natural to be a Christian. They're just good, upright, moral people. They, even if they weren't Christians, they would still be good people. And other people seem to just continually struggle with making good decisions in life. You see it played out all the time. There are people who have a more difficult or a more challenging life trying to do the right thing. And we could point fingers in 100 directions this morning. But one of the things that will keep popping up, that keeps reoccurring in study after study after study, is that if the father is absent from the home, there is such a greater likelihood that the children will have problems in that home. An analysis that I recently saw, according to a study done by Edward Wells and Joseph Franklin, Families and Delinquency, an analysis of 50 separate studies of juvenile crime revealed that the prevalence of delinquency in broken homes was 10 to 15% higher than in intact homes. The 24 million children today living daily without their biological fathers, 1 in 3 of those children, there is a father factor involved in that, and that the greatest percentage of those come from a father-absent situation. Children from father-absent homes are 4 times more likely to be poor. A child with an incarcerated father is 7 times more likely to become incarcerated themselves. Father absence and poverty are strongly related. Data shows it's more difficult to get fathers to provide financial support when they are not married to the mother and when they lack an emotional connection to their children. They don't feel an obligation to that child because they're not around them to emotionally bond with them. And further, in our world today, one of the great concerns, and rightfully so, is that the concern about teen suicide. And one of the most astounding facts to me is that according to researcher Alan Blankenstein, he is the author of a book called Failure is Not an Option, spent most of his life researching ways to improve children's performance in school. And he revealed in his research that a child from a home where there is no father is twice as likely to commit suicide. That startled me when I first saw that. It's not just about the financial situation of poverty and the problems that are associated with that. It's not about the juvenile delinquent and the crime problem and the other associated factors with that, but also the emotional factors that come into play. You see, there's just no substitute for a father in the home. I understand quite well that in the parable of the lost son that the father is there and he's a great father and problems still arise. I understand that. Again, children have the ability, they're granted by God the ability to go their own way and to choose their own life. But having a father in the home, having a good godly father in the home, greatly increases the odds that that child will follow the pathway that is correct. Over the last 30 years, research has shown time and time again that the rise in violent crime parallels the rise in families abandoned by their fathers. It's startling to a lot of people because they can't see that correlation. You see, they're looking to place the blame on other factors. And there are some other factors involved, but most of those are descending from the fact that the father has been kicked out of the house in so much of America. High crime neighborhoods are characterized by high concentrations of families abandoned by their fathers. State-by-state analysis by the heritage scholars indicates that a 10% increase in the percentage of children living in single-parent homes typically leads to a 17% increase in juvenile crime. As the fatherless homes increase, juvenile crime is increasing at an even greater rate. The rate of teenage violent crime corresponds with the number of families abandoned by their fathers. The neighborhoods with a high degree of religious practice are not high crime neighborhoods, according to research. Even in high crime inner city neighborhoods, well over 90% of children from safe, stable homes do not become delinquents. Criminals capable of sustaining marriage gradually move away from a life of crime after they get married, and the mother's strong affection and attachment to her child is determined to be the child's best buffer against a life of crime, and the father's authority and involvement in raising the children are a great buffer also against a life of crime. And so research keeps pointing this over and over again, but in our world we want to point the finger somewhere else. Why? Because the world today is looking to see a different society. They want to think that there's no moral absolutes, that there's no positively absolutely true statements, but this is a true fact. Whether we want to admit it, whether you like the idea of it or not, God has ordained the home. That is a man and woman who are married, and from that marriage is the result of children, not prior, not outside of, but within the confines of that marriage. That is the God-ordained family and home, and anything apart from that is going to have problems. Brother Les, I know some people that are married, they've only been married to their husband or wife and all the kids, and they've got problems. Absolutely. But when you look at society as a whole, all of the data says you need a father in the home. And yet, recently, policymakers and legislators in our governments struggled. There was a Department of Justice research study that in its opening lines, I saw this a while ago, says the disappearance of family-centered males. You know, they got to make it sound all technical jumbo stuff. What they're saying is the father. But the disappearance of family-centered males from communities has generated considerable concern among policymakers and criminologists alike, since past research on the family structure of a community has revealed father absence to be a consistent and potent predictor of variation in levels of violence across ecological contexts. However, and this is amazing to me, this is their statement, this is the problem that they're trying to figure out. However, it is unclear why father absence is problematic. Then they go on and digress into a whole range of different data and research and things that they found. However, it is unclear why the absence of the father is problematic. It's because God set it up in that manner. And when you go against the plan of God, when you go against the way that God has laid out His design for life, there are problems. You cannot fight against God and ever come out a winner. How could we ever hope to, whether it's the individual, a community, a society, a nation, or the world as a whole? God, you know, when we begin to understand that all the things that God has given us are for our best interest, when your parent tells you, when you're a small child, don't touch that, it's hot, it's not because they're trying to keep you from some pleasure that they just want to, you know, keep you back from. They don't want you to enjoy that. It's not that at all. It's because they have your best. They know that that thing is hot. It will burn you. Being burned is painful. Burned myself the other day. I still got a big blister on the end of my thumb from where I burned myself doing some soldering work. It hurts when your parent tells you to do or not to do something. If they're a godly parent, if their life is right and they're doing as God has planned for them to do, They are keeping an eye on your best interest. It is not because they want to keep you from anything that would be joyful because they're just some kind of mean, sick person. It's because they know what's best for you. When God lays out a plan for life and says this is how it should be, a man and woman married, having a family, a father and a mother, it's because that our Heavenly Father, our parent God, knows this is the best way. When we look at His design for the family, and you look at it in the broad terms, you begin to understand God's a very smart individual. This thing wasn't done on the fly. He didn't just throw things in there, but He knew what He was talking about. And all through our life, every time that we try to go against God, we always, when we're honest, come back to the point of having to say, God, you were right. God, you were right. And the sooner that we just learn to accept that God is always right, the easier life becomes. We can be like Paul. We can kick against the pricks and finally have to just literally be blinded before we're willing to stop and say, okay, God, I'll go your pathway rather than fight against you. Or we can early on in life, Ecclesiastes tells us this is the wise way to do it. Give your heart and life to the Lord while you're a young person, that your older years, your later years are easier. You don't have so many regrets. You don't have to cringe as much when the preacher is preaching on a topic that deals with your past or your situations from yesteryear. You can raise your hand and say amen, not because you're trying to gloat or throw something at someone else in the congregation, but because you know that it's right. When we live our lives according to God's plan, things go right. When we step outside of those boundaries, excuse me, is when we begin to see the dissolution of the family, the dissolution of the community, the dissolution of our overall society. Then we wind up in a nation in the chaos that we're in today. And friend, I would be the first one to stand up and tell you there's a lot of problems wrong in our world. There's a lot of things wrong in America today. But the number one, biggest, fattest finger has to be pointed at the home and the problems that have arisen because mom and dads have not been the parents that God has called them to be. We've left the raising of children to themselves, to TV, to the internet. Mom's preoccupied, dad's preoccupied. We think sitting in the stands of a Little League game is doing great parenting. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot more than being able to tell somebody, hey, Susie's having my kid. Be a dad, be a father to that child and let them know what it means to have someone that loves them and is willing to invest in them, that their life matters enough that they would invest their time, their effort, their energy, and their finances into the raising of that child, that you matter. You know, Hollywood, for a generation or more now, has promoted the fatherless home idea. That it can be great. It's just an alternative way that, just another way to live. When we see, when so many studies point to the father being absent from the family as being either the leading or a very significant factor in all of society's woes, I wonder, would it be possible to sue Hollywood for all the damage that they caused to America? But yeah, I understand that we're the ones who turned them on and sat and watched and been entertained. Well, they've destroyed the family. They presented sexual relations as only being exciting or enjoyable outside the confines of marriage. That the only way that people can enjoy life together is to abandon all the moral teachings and the upright living that has been the foundational pillars of our society, of our world. That things that are declared in Scripture to be abomination are better called alternative or optional. I wonder today if we could quantify all of our societal problems that have been caused from this ideology or ideology and receive some kind of reimbursement, because it's cost society greatly, this idea, this concept, this thinking, this wrong belief. Or if we can charge them for the prisons that have had to be built and the prisoner upkeep from their involvement in the damaging of our world. You know, there's characteristics that you see in this story of the prodigal son. You see things about the father. You see things about the son. Sometimes it's not the son who goes missing from the family. Today it's very often the father who goes missing. He's, found somebody young and more attractive, maybe. I don't know. I don't mean to be offensive. Whatever it is, he just got unhappy, went through midlife crisis, needed to find himself. All the nonsense that goes along with it. Make a commitment to your home. This is where I am today, and this is where I'll be tomorrow. Because you, family, matter enough for me that I'm willing to stick around and do what I can to see this family be successful. That prodigal father, the one that leaves, he's self-absorbed. He's seeking his own pleasure. I am surrounded by a world of boys of various ages who refuse to grow up. Their only goal in life is to play. Sometimes we need to take Paul's inspiration. So when I was a child, I spake as a child. But when I became a man, I put away those childish things. I stopped acting like a kid. It's not just about games. It's not just about fun. It's about responsibility. Prodigal father or the prodigal son, either one, they're short-sighted. They only live for the moment. They can't think about the repercussions tomorrow. That whiner that's complaining to you about child support, about how he can't buy the new boat he wants because he's having to pay for his ex's upkeep, and she just fitted it on a new car or a new house or whatever. I don't care. I do not care. I don't want to go back to this, but I'm not sympathetic in any way towards that. Don't be so short-sighted. Don't just live for today. Think about the future. Friend, you think America's messed up today? When you turn on your news and you think our world has problems today, imagine if time should go on 20 or 30 more years, what this place is going to be. Somebody needs to take up the role and the responsibility of being the people that God has called them to be, the persons that God has designed us to be. You know, the characteristics that we find in this prodigal son's father is that, number one, he was forgiving. The Bible teaches us that because that we are forgiven, we also have to forgive others. That includes family members, and sometimes they're the hardest ones to forgive. You know, we treat our families so roughly sometimes. We'll talk to our husband, our wife, our kids, sometimes parents, in ways that we wouldn't dare speak to somebody at work. We'll hurt them in ways that we wouldn't dare express ourselves to somebody outside of that home. Sometimes we feel like, well, because that's mom, or because that's the son, or because that's a brother, that we can talk to them or act that way towards them. You think that's right? Well, no, it's not right. No. Don't act that way. Be the person that you ought to be. But that also requires forgiveness. It means sometimes you're going to have to forgive Cousin Eddie because of the mistakes that he made. And sometimes parents are going to have to forgive the children. Sometimes children are going to have to forgive the parents. Yes. You know, one of the things about the parental and the children's interaction is this fear of finding out. A parent oftentimes lives in fear or denial that at some point their child is going to realize that they're not perfect. And when that realization comes, there's a fear that maybe they won't love me like they used to when they realize that I'm not perfect. Friend, I won't wait for you to figure that out. I'm not a perfect individual. I struggle. I have difficulties. I have challenges. I have needs. But I do love my kids. And the child's side of that equation is that they oftentimes live in this anxiety that if the parent finds out that they already know that they're not perfect, that maybe the parent won't love them as much when they realize the kid knows, that there'll be this kind of barrier that will arise. I've met some wonderful, wonderful people in my life. Been privileged to know some incredible saints of God. But if you get close to them, you get close to their family, sometimes those real close to them aren't as fond of everything that they've said or done in their life as others from the outside. Why? Because they know the individual. Not just the person who appears on the screen, behind the pulpit, or behind the musical instrument, or behind the podium in the classroom, because they really know that individual. They know who they are. They see the good, the bad, the ugly. They see the parts that God has smoothed out and the parts that He's still doing some sanding on. Realize, children, that your parents are human. But if they are godly parents, they're trying to do their best to raise you up and be men and women who could be people for God, a good worker in the kingdom of the Lord. They're struggling. Pressures of society are pushing against them. Necessities of life are pulling at them. Financial concerns oftentimes. Societal concerns. Just the changing transitional roles of seeing their children grow up as they go through the different stages of life puts pressure on the parents. But don't shirk the responsibility. Don't run from that situation that you see. You know, that father, he also was available. When the son came, he didn't go off to the backside of properties. I don't want to see him. He had his chance. He made himself available both before and after that son left. He was also a teacher in that home. When the eldest son was upset by what he saw going on, the father used that as a teaching moment. You know, when we look at this, and the younger son in verse 2 or verse 12 says, and the younger of them, this is Luke chapter 15, verse 12, the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that followed to me. And he divided unto them his living. And we usually consider it, and rightfully so, that he is speaking about his personal wealth, what he has built up or accumulated. Financial things is what we consider this to be, his estate. But there's so much more that we have than just our finances to invest in our children's lives and their futures. We have time. Sometimes that's the most valuable thing that we can give, whether it's to our family or to other things in our world, to spend time with someone. You know, I was conversing on Facebook earlier this week, maybe last week, with one of my aunts and uncles, and I was giving him a thank you. My Uncle Mickey, I was telling him thanks for when I was a kid, and he took me fishing. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, I had absolutely worn my dad out with going fishing. I could not get enough of it. My Uncle Mickey was working at the same job that my dad was, and he was staying with us at the time, and hard work, building high lines. And so in the evenings, though, middle of summer, he'd come home, or to our home where he was staying for a few weeks, and so he would help me dig worms, and then we'd go fishing. Now, what I was doing the other day was I was telling him, I said, I don't know if you remember this or not, but I remember it very well, and I want to say thank you. I was thanking him. He was my uncle, but he was willing to invest some time in a child. I appreciated that time. Probably didn't mean a whole lot to him, but to me it meant a whole lot. I'm thankful for the time that people who cared about me have invested in me. Not just to be brushed off, not to feel like I was too much of a burden to be given time. That their time was more valuable spent watching the latest episode of whatever it is that they're binge watching, or another ball game, or, you know, just take some time to be a part of children's lives. Some of my fondest memories with my own father were not things that cost a lot of money or required us, to travel to some spectacular destination. Sometimes it was simple things on a snow day from school, going rabbit hunting in the fields around the house. Things that involved him spending time with me. The investment of a father can make is wisdom. Son, daughter, I know you think you know what you're doing, but this is a bad trail. It's that way of investing in them, in their future, before the small challenge becomes a great difficulty in life. Showing them love. Love is a very difficult thing sometimes to give when you're upset, when you feel offended, when your feelings are hurt. when you feel like that time has maybe even been wasted. Sometimes love is the best thing that we can give. And that love is what caused that father to be so forgiving, because he loved that son and was glad when he came home. He's looking for him to make his return. Don't ever lose the love that we have for our children, for our families. When we come to the very basic level of life and understand that we're all human, that we all are flawed, some obviously much more so than others. Don't allow that to become an excuse. Just understand that it's true. That when you realize that you have shortcomings and the people that you deal with, they do as well, then you can begin to make progress and go forward in life. When we begin to take on the role that God has planned for us, has designed us to become the person that God has intended for us to be, our world, our nation, our state, our community, and all the way down to our home will be a better place, because someone took upon themselves that privilege of being a father, being a mother in that home like God would have them to be. I hope I haven't depressed you on this Father's Day. That's certainly not been my goal. My hope is to give you a challenge that in this day of this time, there's never been a more needful time period in history that I can see for men to be fathers. Not just to father a child, but to be a father to that child. Enjoy the gift that God has given to us, whether it's biological, through adoption, step parenting, whatever that it is. Enjoy what God has put in your life and allowed you to be a part of. Thanks for being a part of this here at Mansfield First Assembly, and happy Father's Day to you. And this will conclude our service for this morning.